Welcome to Wanda Discoveries. Before we begin today's video, we want to tell you that it contains descriptions of sexual abuse and servitude. We have tried to keep these descriptions as acceptable as possible, but there is some graphic detail in what you're about to hear. There have sadly been many wars since the end of World War II. We are currently watching on TV, on the internet, and on social media, yet another brutal war being fought, this time in Ukraine. War can bring out the best in people, but unfortunately, it also brings out the worst. Russia's invasion of Ukraine, more than any recent conflict, has allowed us, unfortunately, to see the brutal nature of war. Historians say the conflict has brought to life the tragedies of World War II in our new century. Mass killings, indiscriminate shelling, and the targeting of civilians, torture, filtration camps, the kidnapping of Ukrainian children to be raised in Russia as Russians, and rape of old women, young girls and boys and wives in front of their husbands. Most of these crimes exist wherever conflict exists, but in Europe, with its tremendous stockpiles of modern weapons and its seemingly omnipresent cameras, we are seeing much of what is occurring firsthand. For World War II historians, the war in Ukraine answers the oft-posed question, what was World War II like? The atrocities seem to make what happened some 80 years ago all the more real. One of the most tragic stories of World War II is that of the comfort women, a polite name for the forced kidnapping or coercion of women and girls by the Japanese army to comfort their soldiers. As in many war crimes cases, comfort is a euphemism, for this was just a polite term for sexual slavery on a mass scale. Though records exist in Japan, China, Korea, Indonesia, the Philippines, Malaysia, and Papua New Guinea, they are partial and only tell part of the story that Japan to this day is reluctant to talk about openly. However, it should be said that over the last 2 decades, they have made a greater effort to both admit their army's guilt, apologize, and make some restitution. Though many of the surviving comfort women believe it was not enough, time has gone by and most of the victims of this atrocity have passed on, but their memory remains in the national identity of countries occupied by Japan during World War II. It's not just that the children of the comfort women are well into their old age now, it's also that very few comfort women were able to have children after the years of sexual abuse they endured. Physically, they had been made sterile, not intentionally, but from repeated punishing abuse. Mentally, many victims could not even fathom letting a man touch them again after what they had been through. Among the many things taken from these women was the common dream of having children and grandchildren. It's estimated that nearly 500,000 women were taken from their homes to service Japanese troops during the war. Most of the women taken were poor and uneducated. Some were taken by force, literally right off the street. Some were girls who had not yet had their first period. A surprising number were lured into captivity with promises of a good-paying job elsewhere, maybe in the nearest big city, maybe in Japan. The Japanese military secret police committed many of these crimes. Sadly, many women and girls were taken by their own countrymen. Oftentimes, these were criminal gangs. Other times, groups of men hired themselves out as contractors to the Japanese, guaranteeing them a certain number of girls for a certain amount of money. Some families unwittingly sent their daughters and sisters away, thinking they might have a better future elsewhere. One of the most unusual things about the taking of comfort women is that many were Japanese. The Japanese government in the late 1930s and 40s was fascist through and through and tried to model its attitudes on what it thought was the hyper-masculine culture of the samurai. The horrific seizure of comfort women had less to do with the subjugation and use of foreign populations for Japanese ends and was more of a war on women. The Japanese word for comfort woman is ianfu, meaning comforting or consoling woman. This is hardly what it was for the women involved. Still, for historical accuracy, a small number of especially attractive women who were the sole property of high-ranking Japanese officers and officials could possibly enjoy some of the better things in life, as long as they pleased their boss. Apart from the bureaucratic doublespeak, comfort women were called by other names by the Japanese, which indicated their true feelings towards their captives: Japanese, Asian, and in many cases, European. These European women were taken prisoner when the Japanese seized former European colonies in Asia. The degrading words used were public toilet depositories and, on official lists, units of war supplies, but not surprisingly, many of these women and girls died while in captivity. Hunger, disease, beatings, hemorrhaging, shootings for disobedience, and more were all causes of death among these unfortunate women. Frequently, comfort women on death's door were forced out of what little shelter they had and were left to fend for themselves, often in a foreign land, but most of them died before that became an actual situation. There were many cases, especially in the Philippines, where many women and young girls who were taken were forced to pay for their own medical care should they contract a social disease. But of course, they had no money. They weren't paid for their services. You might be able to guess how bills were paid. The intent behind the comfort woman idea was to reduce the number of public rapes the Japanese committed in the conquered lands. Not because they were concerned with the moral implications or the women who were victimized. No, it was only that politicians and officers realized that the public or barely concealed rapes of women were causing unrest in the occupied territories. By secreting women away, this was hoped to be avoided. Another reason for the establishment of comfort stations, as the places where women were kept were called, was to lessen the rates of venereal disease among Japanese troops. This may have worked for a short time, but as the U.S. Navy began to destroy Japan's merchant fleet, condoms and medicine ran in very short supply. In many cases, comfort women were forced to rinse used condoms and use them again. Obviously, many Japanese soldiers did not like to use condoms and risked disease. The end result from late 1943 onward was that venereal disease rates were higher than before the comfort women were subjugated. The excellent but brutal movie Paradise Road, 1997, depicts the lives of a group of captured European and Indonesian women on Sumatra during World War II. After suffering enough as a prisoner, one of the women decides to take the Japanese up on their offer of working in the officers' quarters. Unlike many of the women abused by the Japanese, she is aware of what they want her to do. Only she thinks it will be only for the commanding officer. She gets pretty dresses and lives in a nice house, but the officer beats her, and what's more, invites his comrades to get to know her. The next time the other women see her, only a short time later, she doesn't recognize them, and her eyes stare blankly out of her bruised face. This was likely the case for 99% of the women forced into sexual slavery, but what's for sure is that most women did not live in nice houses with new, pretty dresses. Instead, most kept the clothes they were taken in, or perhaps had brought a small suitcase for the new office or factory job they thought they were going to. When these clothes became ragged, the women and girls might have been given something to wear that had been worn by a now-deceased friend or a gunny sack-type shift, sometimes made out of rough burlap. That newly deceased friend may have died from disease or beating or being quite ill, or might likely have been shot. On some occasions, the Japanese authorities took action against the soldier who had shot or beaten a woman or girl to death. Most of the time, this punishment came in either a simple admonishment or perhaps a reduction in rank. There are only a handful of instances where Japanese soldiers were jailed for a short time for some soldiers accused or proven to have killed one of the comfort women. The most common punishment seems to have been transferring back to Japan, that is, if any punishment took place at all. If the clothes we described sound terrible, think about this. Many comfort stations, as the places where the imprisoned women and girls were kept were called, were right behind the front lines. This occurred mainly in China, where battles of one size or another happened continuously throughout the war, and in the Pacific. There are quite a few pictures of British or Australian soldiers speaking with liberated girls about their experience and providing medical care. This occurred mainly on Papua New Guinea. where a large number of Papuan Japanese women were sexually tortured. These were the daughters of Japanese businessmen who had worked on the large island before the war. Most, but not all, of these men went home to Japan, forgetting or perhaps not even knowing they had a daughter. One of the most infamous incidents of the U.S.-Japanese War in the Pacific happened during the American invasion of the Japanese colony of Saipan. At the end of the battle, Japanese troops and civilians, many of whom had been forced to join the retreat by the Japanese army, were pinned on a narrow stretch of land. In front of them were the U.S. Marines, whom many Japanese thought were cannibals and baby killers, thanks to the insane propaganda put out by the Japanese government. Though many of those who elected to jump, sometimes with the babies in their arms, did so of their own volition, many did not. Among these were many comfort women. Some women believed the Japanese propaganda and jumped out of pure, unreasoning fear. Others were prodded by Japanese bayonets. Others who refused to go had grenades exploded in their hiding places by Japanese soldiers, bent on suicide and killing as many of them as possible. Much of the action on the infamous suicide cliffs of Saipan was filmed by marine photographers some distance away. Though women and girls were taken in sizable numbers from all the nations mentioned at the start of this video, it's estimated that some 80% of all comfort women came from Korea, a Japanese possession since 1896. After the war, one of them, Kim Hak-soon, gave the following account of just part of her experience. When I was 17 years old, the Japanese soldiers came along in a truck, beat us, and then dragged us into the back. I was told if I were drafted, I could earn lots of money in a textile factory. The first day I was raped, and the rapes never stopped. I was born a woman but never lived as a woman. I feel sick when I come close to a man. Not just Japanese men, but all men. Even my own husband, who saved me from the brothel. I shiver whenever I see a Japanese flag. Why should I feel ashamed? I don't have to feel ashamed. She also told of being raped 30 to 40 times a day, every day of the year, during her time as a comfort woman. As you might imagine, this caused intense physical pain and damage. The psychological and emotional damage also never went away. When the war ended, many survivors returned home and never spoke about their experiences to anyone. Many did not even return home, unable to face their families after their experience. It was not until the 1980s that enough comfort women, aided in part by the women's movement of the 1960s and onward, plus their maturity and sense of justice denied, began to protest for reparations and admissions of guilt from the Japanese government. Neither came easily. Many years passed before Japan agreed to pay any money to survivors, and very little. Finally, additional pressure, not only from the survivors but from their few children and grandchildren, as well as Japan's enemies during the war, caused Japan to issue apologies and pay more significant amounts of reparations. However, most of these went to organizations formed to help survivors, and most survivors never saw any of this money. It's believed that only a few dozen comfort women are still alive, but women's rights organizations and others have put increased pressure on the Japanese to do the right thing, even all these years later. In Korea, a famous statue called Peace was placed in front of the Japanese embassy in Seoul, South Korea, depicting a comfort woman asking for justice. Similar statues outside Japanese embassies and consulates were soon erected in many places occupied by the Japanese, including a number in the United States. The Japanese government has repeatedly asked for these statues to be taken down. Most remain standing today. Thank you for watching our presentation on this tragic and important topic. Let us learn from history and join hands in making sure something like this never happens again.